But as I said, now we're going to pick up on this. What difference does all this make for ethics? How are we to understand this now as we're walking in a new setting? And we continue on with Priest's ideas along these lines. So first of all, he says, in the cross-cultural context, missionaries who attempt to live an exemplary life, to be a good witness, will naturally do so in light of their own consciences rather than in light of the conscience of those among whom they speak. They don't know that conscience, perhaps, well enough at that point in time. The result is that their actions, the missionary actions, in areas addressed by native consciences but unaddressed by the missionaries, will tend to be judged as immoral. It's always fascinating, it was in Africa, to hear the nicknames for missionaries. And sometimes you didn't want to know what the nicknames were because they were tied in at times to character flaws. The red-faced man, the angry person, the one who doesn't wait, the watchman, things like that that will characterize how they think of you in relation to the ways you behave, and sometimes they simply saw them as silly and they didn't understand them. Sometimes they judged them as more than just silly, they judged them as literally immoral. So when you're looking in going into a new setting, and here we're going to take the missionary conscience as the blue triangle, and the emic or the insider conscience as the brown triangle. And the brown, where it does not overlap with the blue, these are the areas where the host culture prohibits things, but missionary culture allows them. And again, in the example I've used, my wife and I dating and holding hands and doing things as a couple. We could do that in Kenya. There was not a policy against that in Kenya the way there was in Swaziland. In urban Nairobi, things were more globalized at the time, so you saw a larger variety of practices, but still it was good practice not to do. In Swaziland, I can also say women were not, by policy of our Swazi director, not allowed to wear jeans or trousers of any kind. They could wear them under a skirt or under something like that, but for jogging or exercising, nope. And part of it was, in the African frame of reference, it was the woman's legs that were objects of sexual attraction rather than her upper body. So you could see a woman, as I did sometimes in a river, doing the wash, naked from the waist up, who would wave at me as I was driving by. And from her perspective, there was no violation of ethics. From my perspective, there was a significant violation. Now, if I saw the same woman dressed conservatively in a pantsuit or something like that, and especially if she was up country, she was in effect announcing that she was a prostitute. And it's not something I thought of. It was not part of my conscience. And it was one of the things the women on our team particularly struggled with and had to figure out how do we then change our sense of style and habit in dress from what we're used to, especially if we want to exercise, ride horseback, things like that, which we occasionally did. So again, the area in which missionary behavior is likely to be judged immoral is this area, since it's not governed by the moral sentiments that are operative. It's the missionaries' moral sentiments, it's not the indigenous moral sentiments. And so there can be violations on a regular basis. Thank God that cultures give grace for people to behave in odd or strange ways. Missionaries whose message entails ideas of sin and judgment will naturally tend to speak of sin with reference to matters about which their conscience speaks and native conscience is silent, with the result that native conscience does not work to support the message that the missionaries are giving. And so as you're looking then at the missionary conscience in this area, so now it's the blue area that parallels that. It's the blue area in which the missionary is likely to judge the behavior of nationalists. They don't come on time. Look at how they raise their children. I'm thinking of things I heard of on a regular basis. Don't they care about life? I often heard that comment from missionaries. That was misunderstanding some of the framework. In a place where child mortality is quite high, how you have to handle that, you do it differently in a place where it's expected no child will ever die. as opposed to a place where it expects children to die before they reach the age of 5. Behavior here is not governed by the moral sentiments of the national conscience, but by the missionaries. And so when missionaries want to point out sin in the local setting, unless they've been there long enough to understand and drink deeply from the national sentiment, often can find things that the nationals don't think of as sin and don't see as sin. And so for them, the missionary is a mysterious person with a set of rules. In a silly kind of illustration that brings this home for me is I'm color unconscious. I'm not color blind, but I'm color unconscious when it comes to fashion. So if you see me wearing things that don't match, realize likely my wife didn't get a good look at me before I left out the door that morning, or at least chose not to comment on anything. I want to be careful not blaming it on her, but she is the fashion police in terms of my color coordination in the house, because I'm likely to wear anything. Eventually I'm memorizing things, but I'm slow on the uptake. And she would, when we were first married, well, are you going to wear that shirt with those trousers? And I eventually learned it really wasn't a question, it was a statement. And I had to learn how to pay attention to that and realize, okay, something's wrong here, what's going on? But you have to keep in mind, I'm the type of a student in 7th grade. I have a picture of my 7th grade picture. I have a plaid open sweater with a plaid shirt underneath, different plaids. What you don't see in the picture is I also had plaid trousers on. And so it was a full effect. And it's funny, even I, when I looked at my picture, could see there's something that's off in this, whereas I hadn't noticed it when I was putting the clothes on in the morning. So I was trying to learn color coordination, and my wife and I for a long time had a running argument as to whether color coordination is a cultural thing or it's a universal thing. And her argument was, well, everybody knows what colors go together. And I say, no, that's color conscious. And I look at how the Swazis dress. Look at how the Kenyans dress. Any color goes with any other color. And she says, yes, but they just don't have a sense of fashion. And so part of the framing was over that question. But I remember once she told me, look, gray and brown don't go together, so you don't wear them. And then I got a present from my mother-in-law. It was a hand-knit sweater in which there was gray and there was brown. And I thought, okay, I've got my weapon now. And so I waited for an opportune moment, and I pointed out to my wife, you tell me gray and brown don't go together, but your own mother made this gray and brown sweater for me. And she looked at it and she said, but that gray goes with that brown. And I knew I had lost. I knew I had lost. Now, part of the framing and losing in this is now color coordination for me is still something of a mystery. I'm not sure I'll ever get past, if you gave me a color coordination test, my color coordination skills probably would be 5 on a scale of 0 to 100. And that's fine, that's just being honest. But the reality is she knows the rules. She understands the mystery. Her color coordination might be a 95 out of 100 on the same scale, at least for the U.S. fashion sense. You see, I haven't let go of my issue of it being a culturally bound thing. But part of the framing is then I rely on her to tell me the rules because I don't know them instinctively. And where this ties in this area is when the missionary knows what sin and the national does not, who has the key to that knowledge? It's the missionary. It's the cross-cultural worker. And so the cross-cultural worker will tell people in the local setting what is sin, but for the people it's something of a mystery. Well, when I did it this time, was it sin, or does this gray go with this brown? I don't know. Only the missionary can tell with certainty. And you can see how that leads to significant issues.